Hey everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. With all of the federal funding that's out now and a lot more that's coming, there's been a lot of talk about fiber and future-proofing broadband networks, and a lot of focus is on that, but that's not the only game in town, and there are significant changes happening that could make a difference. I'll be talking about that in just a second. Thanks for joining me. Rick Husey here with Broadband Deployment News, here from Z-Quorum. So, as I was mentioning, everybody's talking about fiber. So, with the federal funding that's available now through the USDA Reconnect, through ARPA, through RDOF, a lot of that's focused on fiber. It's like, where are our unserved and underserved areas, and how can we get to those? How can we future-proof that? Ways that we can bring broadband to those areas that people don't have broadband right now. That's the focus, right? And with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that we've got coming up here, that's going to be, one of the focuses there was a lot of that was fiber, and that's what we're looking to do. But there's 5G out there, and one of the things with 5G and some of these mid-band spectrums is that they can be out very, very quickly. And then does that lock out federal funds in areas that are unserved or were formerly, let's say, unserved or underserved if 5G is available, right? That's a really good question. And a lot's going to be happening with 5G because of some prior spectrum auctions. So let's talk about that. One of the things that we have seen here just in the last week is AT&T and Verizon, both of those operators, those obviously national mobile operators, acquired a lot of C-band spectrum in an auction that the FCC held. And C-band is one of those spectrums that it's not low-band spectrum, and it's not really high-band spectrum, it's mid-band spectrum, and that's really good spectrum for 5G. One of the things that was promised with 5G was really, really high speeds, and a lot of times the hype around that was related to millimeter wave. Now, millimeter wave is very, very fast, but it's, as the name implies, it's very short waves that are very susceptible to attenuation. They don't go through walls, don't go through trees, leaves. You basically need line of sight if you're going to be using millimeter waves. So Verizon, for example, that's been their plan prior to getting the C-band spectrum. They've been out in various cities launching 5G service with millimeter waves very, very fast, but you need these small cells, and they have to have line of sight to, each small cell has to have line of sight to the other. These can be on light poles and on tops of building, or just on the building, on the corner of a building. But you need line of sight, and then you need line of sight to the subscriber. It's not like your normal wireless service where you can just, doesn't have to be line of sight. So this makes it really only a good solution for highly dense areas where you've got lots of customers populated in one location. So that was Verizon's tactic. T-Mobile took another tactic because they had some mid-band spectrum that they already had access to, and then with the acquisition of Sprint, they got even more of that. I think they acquired some CBRS spectrum. CBRS is also in that mid-band spectrum. So they were sitting pretty well to be able to provide 5G service to lots of areas throughout the country. And now AT&T and Verizon are trying to do the same thing with C-band, and there's this controversy with C-band because the spectrum is in a range. C-band spectrum is in like 3.7, looking at my notes here, 3.7 to 3.9 gigahertz range. So it's mid-band, reasonably fast. Should be well over 100 megabits per second, and then again it goes a lot further than millimeter wave does. But then you've got altimeters and planes that are in like 4.2 to 4.4 gigahertz, and there was some concerns about whether, from the FAA as to whether the C-band around airports would be causing disruptions to airplanes and their altimeters. So AT&T and Verizon were asked to delay the rollout of this, and I think originally was scheduled for December, and then they were asked to delay it again. They were scheduled to go January 5th, and originally they rejected that. As you can see here in this story, they rejected the idea of delaying that. It says here, in an ongoing battle pitting the FAA against airlines, against the FCC, and airlines against the FCC, Verizon and AT&T, over their planned launch of mid-band 5G service, the mobile carriers are declining a request by the FAA for a 2-week delay. So the request was only 2 weeks. Early this year, the FCC auction sold the two carriers' rights to use so-called C-band frequencies at a price of nearly $70 billion. So the spectrum the C-band, by the way, was used for satellite downlinks, and there was a lot of waste there. So the FCC was working with the satellite companies that was using that spectrum that were granted the rights to use that to try to exit this lower portion of the C-band spectrum, move all of everything that they were doing up some so that this lower portion of the C-band spectrum could be used for 5G. And by the way, I did a pretty detailed broadcast sometime back on C-band, very educational, that I will go ahead and link to here. I think I'll link to one that I did on CBRS as well, because those are the two mid-band spectrums that I think that we're talking about here that I think would be of interest to you if you're looking at what is going on here with 5G in these spectrums. Talk about millimeter wave on that 5G. Let's say we got let me think now. So I've got a 5G one as well. So I'm going to link to 3 broadcasts. There's one on 5G that talks about what it is, and millimeter wave, and then the mid-band spectrum. So it's all pretty interesting, very educational. So I'll link to those. But what we have today is we're talking about C-band spectrum, and with again AT&T and Verizon launching this. But they did go ahead and decide. Let me back over to here. Where am I? They did decide to settle that. So here's a statement from the president on 5G deployment. This was January 4th. My administration is committed to rapid 5G deployment while minimizing disruptions to air operations and continuing to maintain the world's safest airspace. Last night's agreement is a significant step in the right direction, and we're grateful to all parties for their cooperation and good faith. So the parties did come to terms there. And one of the things that the operators are saying is, this is already being done in other countries, and it's not been an issue. In fact, they were talking about France. I think because in France there's U.S. flights going there, and they have some exclusion zones around airports that are very small, but they're still operating there. In Canada, they have exclusion zones, but they're a lot bigger around these airports to try to protect them. So I believe they are going to be doing exclusion zones in a smaller area like France. So you see here, AT&T and Verizon agree to C-band 5G rollout delay. There's Buttigieg, Transportation Secretary. AT&T and Verizon Communications said late Monday, January 3rd, that the companies will delay their planned January 5th rollout of 5G wireless service in the C-band, at least briefly, as requested by the Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. At Secretary Buttigieg's request, we voluntarily agreed to one additional 2-week delay of our deployment of C-band 5G services, AT&T said. We also remain committed to the 6-month protection zone mitigations we outlined in our letter. Again, those would be exclusion areas around airports. We know aviation safety and 5G can coexist, and we are confident further collaboration and technical assessment will allay any issues. I think that's all I had highlighted there. But then here is an article, this is in PC Magazine online, that gives a little bit more details about what Verizon's going to do. And this is making me think, as I was looking at this whole controversy and Verizon coming out with this, is with a lot of these federal dollars, they have to be sent to a unserved or underserved area. And unserved would be an area in the latest Broadband Infrastructure Act, the Biden Infrastructure Act that recently passed. Unserved would be an area that would be less than 25 by 3, and underserved would be an area that would be less than 100 by 20. So that is where these dollars have to go. So if you are going to get funding or grants, it has to go to an area that's underserved or unserved. They have to be underserved or unserved projects. And a certain amount of that area needs to be unserved. It doesn't have to be the whole area. So you can target an area that has some underserved customers. There's people that can't get, let's say, 100 by 20. You can target an area, and you can provide service to a bigger area and still get funds for that bigger area, as long as you're serving some people that are not getting that. But when you've got wireless, basically everybody is, and especially if it's a mid-band spectrum and you don't need line of sight, a lot of times you're talking about an area, a good swath of area that can be covered by towers, and then you've got broadband service. And it doesn't just have to be broadband service in somebody's mobile phone. You can do a fixed wireless offering with C-band or CBRS, some of these mid-band spectrums, and of course with millimeter wave as well. But millimeter wave is only going to be in urban areas that generally already have other options for broadband, so it's going to be in an area where there's probably already cable modem service and fiber service. So I see millimeter wave as more of a competition to wired broadband that's already there. I don't know how well it's going to take off because people don't like to make change, and if you've got good broadband service with a wired service in your house, why would you scrap that and go with millimeter wave and have to have an antenna that then brings it into the home, that kind of thing. So I think this mid-band spectrum is what's interesting, and this was what could provide some, provide some service in unserved and underserved areas before the fiber ever gets in the ground or in the ground, off the ground, however you want to put it. So you've got now, as this infrastructure money comes out, you've got people looking at unserved and underserved areas and what they are today. And then the FCC is going to be coming out with a broadband map that's going to be saying, okay, here's where people can get broadband service and what the speeds are. And if you've got people like Verizon and AT&T and T-Mobile that are expanding their 5G services, including with a fixed wireless service that somebody can get in their home that is well over 100 megabits per second, that area would no longer be underserved. So then it therefore would no longer be qualifying for new federal funds, such as through the Broadband Equity and Deployment Act, the Biden infrastructure bill that recently passed. That's part of the infrastructure bill. So that I thought was pretty interesting. And you can see that Verizon and AT&T are trying to get out there. They say they're trying to get out there to counter T-Mobile, who's been in the process of expanding their mid-band spectrum 5G services. But as they do this, and as they go into certain areas, they're going to be going into more rural areas because they have a greater reach with this mid-band spectrum. So we see here, Verizon will launch its new C-band and 5G network in 46 major metro areas on January 19th, the company said, covering more than 100 million people across the country. It's a huge number of people, because you hear about, Frontier coming out and saying, yeah, we're going to have 20 million people covered by fiber, soon. And, we're talking about 100 million here just in a shot right there as they launch this. Verizon promised earlier today to provide that coverage this month. Verizon said it has the 100 million population coverage ready to go today. And again, they've been delaying this, waiting on trying to get this FAA issue settled. What will C-band do? Verizon C-band currently consists of 600 megahertz of airwaves sandwiched between its current 4G allocations and the 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi band. When it flips it on, it will at least double the bandwidth available in most Verizon devices. Verizon's earlier fast 5G system, millimeter wave, has incredible speed and massive capacity, but it covers very little area for the reasons that I mentioned. C-band's coverage will be closer to existing 4G systems. So it's not going to be quite as far because the spectrum, the waves are smaller, the spectrum is not like the really low band stuff, but it's going to go pretty far. 5G users on the new network can download the highest definition movies in minutes, import songs to giant CAD files. Okay. Songs? That's weird. Download huge documents and more. It allows for more seamless HD audio and video streaming, including video chats, video conferencing, and FaceTime calls with clear sound and video. C-band will let Verizon offer new home internet options. So again, this is kind of key. It's not just going to be mobile. The home internet service will be primarily offered in areas that don't have Verizon Fios. So where they've already got fiber, they're not going to do this. But if they've got the towers and the infrastructure to be able to do 5G in this mid-band, where they don't have their Fios fiber service, then they're going to do that. $50 a month plan is $25 for some Verizon wireless customers with a 300 megabit per second hard throttle. They've got a 70-month plan, $35 for some Verizon wireless customers with no throttle, but advertising up to 1 gigabit per second. And when they say about advertising, at first I read like you're going to get advertising on your browser or something. I think they're just saying they're advertising up to 1 gigabit per second. Neither has a monthly data cap. And then you can see the plans here. You got 5G Home and 5G Home Plus, $50 and $70, powered by 5G, high-speed downloads, Wi-Fi 6 router included. So again, this is a home service where it comes into your home. You've got a Wi-Fi 6 router in there, so you can get good speeds within your home. 2-year price guarantee, 3-year price guarantee. Some other things here, some other perks they throw in as far as some streaming services, Disney Plus, AMC Plus, get a Google Nest Mini, kind of cool. So they're throwing a lot in there, very attractive. This then turned into a complicated conversation with the Verizon folks about whether anyone who doesn't have millimeter wave coverage should sign up for the more expensive plan. In other words, why should I bother with the 5G Home Plus over the 5G Home if millimeter wave is not in my area? So I guess what they're saying there is, am I really going to get a lot faster speeds, like the promise of the 1 gig per second, with not having millimeter wave? If you're in a C-band only area, Verizon promises typical download speeds of 90 to 170 megabits per second. So you can see that 90 is below what the FCC considers underserved in the new Broadband Infrastructure Act. But I think people are seeing, with T-Mobile, and I think probably with Verizon and the C-band, AT&T and the C-band, you'll probably be seeing well over 100 megabits per second. I think T-Mobile, when they're doing tests in really ideal conditions, you're seeing like 400 megabits per second. So, and depending on distance and, if you're in the middle of a building versus, somewhere on the outside tier, it's going to vary. But I think they can easily get over 100 megabits per second. Verizon is still expanding millimeter wave coverage, and that millimeter wave and C-band will complement each other. So they're still looking at going into areas that are highly dense, where they can put in millimeter wave and provide even faster service. But the biggest thing is this mid-band service and being able to expand their 5G service, whether it's mobile or this home product, into larger swaths of area very, very quickly. Where will C-band be? While only 46 FCC certified areas can get C-band before 2024, many of the 46 areas include huge regions, rural regions. And some of this date as far as 2024 has to do, I believe, with clearing out the C-band spectrum. Again, that was spectrum that was being used by satellite companies, and they had a certain amount of time to clear that spectrum before some of that spectrum could be used. The New York area includes the entire state of Connecticut, for instance, and the Miami one includes the entire southeast quarter of the Florida Peninsula. And you can see here the different states and the amount of population that they're talking about in here. So quite a few areas. I've got this map here. All 46 regions will get C-band on January 19th. While Verizon will eventually fill in the blanks, the network will start in center cities and work outwards. So it's going to start at the center of the city, but again, with this being mid-band spectrum and being something that can propagate pretty far and be using their same, probably a lot of their same tower structures, not needing micro cells, I think this will probably expand out pretty quickly. As part of the deal with the FAA, Verizon and AT&T have agreed to create exclusion zones around no more than 50 airports in the 46 areas for the next 6 months. So it's a 6-month agreement, and again, I think these are supposed to be small exclusion zones, and then at that point they'll be studying this and any interference that they would be seeing with altimeters. And you know how it is, you get on the airplane and it's like everybody needs to turn off their devices, put your airplane in airplane mode, and a lot of people say it doesn't really matter. But they do say, I think, that these altimeters are kind of sensitive and could cause some issues. And as you get more people using it, see right now they're saying it's not been really documented that there's any issues, but as you get more and more 5G being used and you have more people, let's say on airplanes, with their devices that are connecting via 5G, then maybe that's where this could become an issue. So they'll be studying this, I'm sure, over the next 6 months. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. So the question is, as the FCC is working on the broadband maps, will these maps include these services from people like T-Mobile, Verizon, and AT&T? As customers having access, they could go to Verizon and say, I would like your 5G service and be able to get a service that's over 100 megabits per second. If that's available, and Verizon can provide that service within a reasonable amount of time, I think it's like 10 days or less, they could bring somebody up on deployment on that, then that would not be an underserved area and it would not qualify for grants. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when these broadband maps come out, which are supposed to come out sometime this year. When we cannot get any funds or have any funds deployed from this latest Infrastructure Act until that map is available. So I think there might be some smaller amounts of funds that could be sent to states for getting their broadband offices in place, but actual deployment of broadband, they want to make sure that the maps are in place so that we know who has broadband and who doesn't. In other words, which areas are served and which areas are underserved. And again, the question is, where does 5G work in with that? So that all remains to be seen. Thanks for joining me. If this was helpful, if you like this, give me a like or a thumbs up on the video on YouTube. Go ahead and click the subscribe button. Make sure you click the bell and you'll be notified whenever I'm live with a video. I'm live here pretty much every day with broadband deployment news, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.